Okay, let's jump right into Ezra chapter 4 for this deep dive.
Sounds good.
This part really focuses, doesn't it, on the pushback the people of Judah and Benjamin got when they came back.
Absolutely. They're trying to rebuild, especially the temple, and almost immediately run into problems.
Yeah, it's not smooth sailing at all. The source material really paints this picture of, well, sustained opposition.
It does. We're talking years, different kings, different tactics. It's quite a story of resistance.
So let's unpack that. How did it start? What were the first signs of trouble for Zerubbabel and the others?
Well, the exiles are back. They've got the go-ahead from King Cyrus of Persia, and work on the temple has begun, laying the foundation.
A hopeful moment, you'd think.
You would. But then the text introduces the enemies of Judah and Benjamin, also calls them the peoples around them.
Okay, so the locals, essentially. People who maybe moved in while Judah was in exile.
That's the general understanding, yes. And their first move is interesting. They come to the leaders, like Zerubbabel and Joshua.
And what do? Straight up opposition.
Not exactly. They actually offer to help.
Help? Wait, the enemies offer to help build the temple.
That's what the text says. Their specific line is, let us help you build because, like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here.
Esarhaddon. So they're claiming a long history there and, crucially, shared worship.
Exactly. They're positioning themselves as, fellow believers who've been there for generations, thanks to this Assyrian king who resettled them.
That's quite an approach. Not what you'd expect from enemies. How did Zerubbabel and the leaders take it?
They weren't buying it. The response, according to the source, is a hard no.
Just flat-out refusal.
Yep. Very clear. They say, you have no part with us in building a temple to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us.
So they draw a sharp line. This is our project, mandated by our decree from Cyrus. No mixing.
Precisely. They're claiming exclusive religious and political authority for this task based on Cyrus's edict.
And you have to wonder, right, for you listening, was that offer genuine? Or was it maybe a tactic, like a way to infiltrate the project, maybe dilute its purpose or gain control?
The text calling them enemies certainly leans towards the latter. It suggests the leaders perceive the offer as insincere, maybe even a threat disguised as cooperation.
It definitely highlights that opposition isn't always shouting and fighting. Sometimes it wears a helpful mask.
Well said. And predictably, after that rejection, the mask comes off.
So the tactics change.
Immediately. The source says these same peoples around them then started actively working to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid.
Fear and discouragement. Okay, that sounds more like classic opposition.
And frustration. They wanted to frustrate their plans, so obstruction becomes the goal.
How did they do that? Just making trouble locally.
The text mentions a specific method. They hired counselors to work against them.
Hired counselors. Like lobbyists or legal advisors?
That's the implication. People skilled in navigating the Persian system, perhaps, to raise objections, create delays, file complaints. Bureaucratic warfare, essentially.
Wow. So this wasn't just random harassment. It was organized, funded opposition using the system itself.
Seems so. And it wasn't short-lived. This is the key point in the text.
Right, the time frame.
It says this strategy, the hiring of counselors, went on during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
The entire reign of Cyrus. But he's the one who authorized the rebuilding.
I know, it's ironic, isn't it? But the opposition persisted through his reign and into the next under Darius. That's potentially decades of this kind of pressure.
Decades of trying to build while people are actively, professionally trying to stop you. That's draining.
Absolutely. It shows incredible persistence on both sides, really.
And for you, the listener, think about that. Opposition doesn't have to be a single dramatic event. It can be this slow, grinding pressure, using official channels, wearing people down over time. It's a different kind of battle.
And the battleground shifted again. It escalated beyond local interference and hired help.
How so?
The source moves on to later Persian kings. It mentions an accusation being formally lodged against Judah and Jerusalem during the reign of King Xerxes.
Xerxes. So after Darius, the opposition is still going strong.
Still going. And then it details another even more significant effort under the next king, Artaxerxes.
Okay, what happened under Artaxerxes?
This is where we get the detailed letters. The text mentions one letter sent by figures like Bishlam, Mithridath, Tebiel and their associates.
A formal complaint to the king.
Yes, and it specifies it was written in Aramaic script and language.
The official language of the empire's administration.
Yes.
So this is serious business.
Definitely. And then the source focuses on a second letter to Artaxerxes, laying out the case in detail. This one seems to be the main thrust of their argument.
Who sent this second, more detailed letter?
The key figures named are Rehum, described as the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary. They're writing on behalf of a larger group.
What kind of group?
It lists various officials, judges, administrators from different cities like Tripolis, Persia, Iraq, Babylon, even Elamites from Susa, but it also loops back to the earlier group.
The peoples around them.
Essentially, yes. It mentions the other people whom the great and honorable Ashurbanipal deported and settled in the city of Samaria and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates.
Ashurbanipal, another Assyrian king reference.
Yeah.
And Trans-Euphrates, the whole region west of the river. So it's a coalition of Persian officials and these settled populations.
Exactly. A united front sending this complaint.
And what was their complaint?
Yeah.
What did they tell King Artaxerxes the Jews were doing?
They hit several points. First, they reported the Jews were rebuilding Jerusalem. But they didn't just report it, they framed it. They called it a rebellious and wicked city.
Oof. Leading with strong language.
Very strong. They pointed out the work on the walls and foundations, implying fortification, danger.
Building defenses.
Right. But their killer argument, the one aimed squarely at the king's interests, was economic.
Let me guess, taxes.
Bingo. They argued that if Jerusalem was rebuilt, if its walls were finished, the city would stop paying taxes, tribute, and duty.
Ah, the classic it'll hurt your wallet argument.
Precisely. They warned the king directly of a loss of royal revenues. That gets any ruler's attention.
I bet. How did they justify bringing this up? Did they claim it was just neighborly concern?
They framed it as loyalty. They said they felt an obligation to the palace and couldn't stand by and see the king dishonored by this potential loss and rebellion.
So we're just looking out for you, Your Majesty. Very clever.
Very. And they proposed a course of action.
What do they want the king to do?
They asked him to check the history books, basically, to order a search of the royal archives of his predecessors.
Why? What did they expect him to find?
They were pretty confident, actually. They predicted the archives would show Jerusalem had always been a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place of rebellion from ancient times.
Wow, using history against them.
Absolutely. They even suggested that its rebellious nature was the very reason it got destroyed before. They're saying, this city's inherently bad news, king. Check the records.
So they're building this case. It's rebellious now, it'll cost you money, and history proves it's always been trouble.
Exactly. And the final warning was stark. If Jerusalem is rebuilt, the king will end up losing control, being left with nothing in the entire Trans-Euphrates region.
They really escalated the stakes there, from a local building project to a threat to the whole imperial territory.
They did. It's a masterclass in political maneuvering, framing local conflict in terms of grand imperial concerns.
And for you listening, notice that strategy. Connect local issues to the big picture concerns of those in power in this case: rebellion, revenue, and regional control. They used history, economics, and fear of instability. It was incredibly strategic.
It worked.
The king bought it.
The sources say King Artaxerxes responded directly to Rehum, Shimshai, and their group. He read their letter, had it translated.
And did he order the archive search they requested?
He did. The text confirms a search was made.
And what did the archives turn up according to the king's reply?
Well, according to the text, the archives backed up the claims. They found Jerusalem did have a long history of revolt against kings, a history of rebellion and sedition.
So the opponent's historical argument landed.
It seems so. The records apparently also showed that powerful kings had once ruled the entire Trans-Euphrates region from Jerusalem and collected taxes from everywhere.
Okay, so from the Persian perspective, reading those records, Jerusalem looks like a former regional power center with a nasty habit of causing trouble.
That seems to be the conclusion Artaxerxes drew, because his command was decisive.
What did he order?
He ordered the work to stop immediately. He told Rehum and Shimshai to make the Jews cease rebuilding, adding that the city shouldn't be rebuilt until I so order.
A direct imperial stop work order. Did he explain why?
Yes, his reasoning echoed the letter's concerns. He warned his officials, be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests? He clearly saw it as a potential threat to his power and finances in the region.
So the opponents successfully tied the rebuilding project to the king's own fears and interests.
They absolutely did. The historical and economic arguments were persuasive at the highest level.
What happened on the ground then, when Rehum and Shimshai got this royal decree?
No messing about. The text says as soon as the letter was read to them, they went immediately to Jerusalem.
Straight away.
And they didn't just deliver the message politely, the source is blunt. They compelled them by force to stop.
By force. So they used troops or guards.
The language certainly implies coercion, physical enforcement of the king's order. This wasn't a suggestion anymore.
So the opposition escalated from offers to legal challenges to letters and finally to direct state-backed force.
That's the trajectory described, and the result.
The work stopped.
Completely. Thus, the work on the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill. The opposition achieved its goal.
And the text connects this back, right? Saying the halt lasted until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia.
Yes, it links back to that earlier period mentioned with the hired counselors, emphasizing this wasn't just a brief pause, but a significant, lengthy interruption caused by this whole campaign.
It really paints a picture of relentless, adaptive opposition over a long period.
It certainly does. From that initial, maybe insincere offer of help, through years of bureaucratic frustration under Cyrus and into Darius's reign, then escalating to formal accusations under Xerxes, and finally that powerful, successful letter campaign to Artaxerxes using history and economics.
Which led directly to the archives being checked, the king being convinced of a threat.
And the work being halted by force, just as the opponents wanted. It's a stark example of how rebuilding efforts can be undermined through multiple avenues.
It really shows that challenges rarely come from just one direction. They had local resistance, bureaucratic hurdles, high-level political maneuvering, historical arguments, economic pressure, and ultimately force.
Yeah, a multi-pronged attack. And I think for you, the listener, pondering this chapter, there's a really potent idea here about the use of history.
How so?
Well, notice how the opponents didn't just complain about the present. They actively weaponized the past. They used Jerusalem's historical reputation, as found in the archives, to shape the king's decision about its future. It shows how powerful historical narratives can be in political arguments.
That's a great point. History wasn't just background, it was ammunition.
Exactly. And also just how timeless those core drivers are. Concerns about rebellion, control, and especially royal revenue. These were the levers the opponents pulled, and they worked. Those kinds of arguments about power and money, they resonate across centuries.
Definitely. So as you reflect on this dive into Ezra 4, maybe think about where you see similar dynamics today. How are historical stories or economic fears used to argue for or against certain projects or groups? And what does this long shadow of Jerusalem's rebellious reputation tell us about how powerfully a place's past, or at least the recorded past, can influence its present and future?
Lots to chew on there for sure.